Thank you for attending to my presentation. My name is Jennifer Walsh Marr, and I'm an academic English instructor at Vantage College within the University of British Columbia. I'm presenting on work undertaken with my colleagues Sarah Lynch and Tanya Turbot to revamp a first-year writing course for English as an additional language users at Vantage College at UBC. This curricular redevelopment is in the context of Vantage College, where international students complete their first year of disciplinary studies with concomitant embedded language instruction. This sample student timetable here shows a sample art student's course load with the 80 minutes weekly of this writing course. This extends over 2 semesters or 26 weeks, giving us a unique stretch of time for a spiral curriculum that revisits earlier lessons to deepen understanding and deployment as student writing expectations deepen throughout their first year. We drew from foundational scholarship in our pedagogical approach and principles. This included the teaching and learning cycle, where we move through deconstructing exemplar texts to jointly constructing them in class before students move on to independent construction. We drew from UBC's repository of case studies, a compilation of undergraduate student projects that are representative of writing assignments in their upper division courses. Our program is SFL informed, using meta-language to highlight what's going on, both features forms and functions, as well as task-based language teaching to develop students' academic literacy. Our underlying tagline is reading like writers. This means reading text not just for what they say, but how they say it. We analyze features of exemplar text to establish meta-language and purposefully connect the purpose of a text with the language choices that enact it. The aim is to build students' linguistic repertoires for flexibility, rather than just practice prescriptive rules, developing skills to evaluate others and their own texts for further revision. Our spiral design means topics get revisited. In Term 1, the focus is on building meta-language, connections between purpose and features through paraphrasing definitions. We work with identifying and manipulating processes, participants, and circumstances, and various clausal structures in writing paragraph definitions. Quizzes in Term 1 are to establish a shared meta-language. In Term 2, students deepen understanding and deployment as they incorporate the Term 1 features into larger case study research projects, similar in structure to a prototypical problem solution essay. We revisit introductory assignments or introductory lessons from Term 1 and see how those components can be arranged to build coherence and authority in more sophisticated ways. Emails bookend the course, beginning with an academic email. The lecture uses emails to introduce the 3 meta functions, and the student task establishes a relationship with the instructor. By the end of the Term 2 case study research project, students then revisit the stages and features of email to write a message of advocacy to an administrator or government official based on their findings. So in Term 1, we begin with an introduction to transitivity, with the clause as the basic unit of meaning, with processes, participants, and circumstances the building blocks of meaning. We build on forms that students are typically know and shift the focus to function in the clause and larger context, highlighting the components and excerpts from those repository of those student-generated case studies mentioned earlier. We play with these components in introducing grammatical metaphor in the service of paraphrasing. Because students typically Google metaphor, we start with a typical literary or lexical metaphor, and then extend into grammatical metaphor. And then get into the concept of congruence and grammatical metaphor. And that is not just consumer, but the process of consumption. And this is to build the high-stakes skill of paraphrasing, beyond just put it in your own words. We show how the happening or process often shifts from an action to being and allows for sophisticated ideas in grammatically simple sentence structures. As we see in these examples, when an action is described in the here and now, it's called congruent, and ideas may be centered around actions, and it takes a few clauses to represent what happens. When we nominalize something for academic discourse, it's called metaphorical, and this makes an action or event into a thing or phenomenon we can study and discuss. With participants nominalized through grammatical metaphor, we then begin with our lessons on relational processes when introducing process types. The task focus is to differentiate between defining and describing with identifying and attributive relational processes. We then gradually expand the repertoire of process types, noting patterns of usage and form across different text genres. Our forthcoming article in TESOL Quarterly special issue on linguistically responsive instruction delves further into how and why we teach definitions. This here is a sample student activity where we focus on function and acknowledge a variety of patterns. Working through the teaching and learning cycle, we bridge to joint construction by reviewing key linguistic features of definitions. We supply students with the source material and co-construct these in class time, either at the chalk face in the before times or through an online platform while remote during COVID. Students then move on to their independent construction in their first definition assignment, receive comprehensive feedback, and then complete another. In Term 2, we look at the larger text from which we drew individual sentences and paragraphs through Term 1. Students see them situated within larger research projects produced by UBC students. We chose this repository A because it's open access and open copyright, and B because undergraduate student texts are both authentic and closer to our student zone of proximal development. The rationale here draws on identifying students as legitimate peripheral participants in the academy. We revisit this imagery and simplified meta-language throughout, calling the textual metafunction organization, the ideational content, and highlighting how all texts are built upon intersecting features of each. Drawing on Kaplan's guiding questions for deconstruction, we query the textual or organizational features, revisiting clausal structures, theme and reme, and nominalization within exemplar case study texts. We call the experiential metafunction content and revisit lessons on process type, nominal density of participants, circumstance types, and whether logic is explicit or embedded. And revisiting our very first lessons of the course that highlighted the connections between text purposes and discrete features, we expanded in modality and citation practices to indicate interpersonal positioning. The deconstruction tasks shift towards scaffolded independent construction within our larger case study assignment, which incorporate at least one definition. So the case study assignment is similarly structured to a problem solution text, with flexibility in the length and organization of stages. We stipulate that the focus is food-related, as the topic can go in many different disciplinary directions, that it's local, so as to become more familiar with students' new environs, and a real-world problem, so as to facilitate advocacy. The final task is significantly scaffolded, with feedback at the outset of the semester, second semester, on their topic focus, then the organization of their early research, and then their draft before the final version. And we find assigning the advocacy email due date before the final version of their case study helps them articulate the issue and recommendations. So through the term, we revisit and build upon previous lessons of the text purpose and features, deconstructing larger texts, then building more nuanced familiarity with the mechanics of their construction. Throughout, there's a focus on function, Why has the writer made these choices? What is the result? And what are other options? Here, the task is to determine what happens when these bolded elements are thematic. Do they maintain the focus, shift it, make a logical connection, or convey the writer's attitude? In discussing revision, we revisit paraphrasing and grammatical metaphor and congruence, and as always, is situated in the context in which students are doing their work. It's always about context. We revisit grammatical metaphor and nominalization from Term 1, describing congruent as less careful, less planned language, maybe spoken or in their first draft. This is timed as students are working on revisions, and how packed up or metaphoric language choices may be helpful in their revisions. It also serves as a springboard to look at other means of metaphor, including logical and interpersonal. So we parallel congruence and metaphor with explicit and logic and implicit, with these examples showing how the logic of the conjunctions on the left that are explicit shift to the processes with embedded logic within the processes. We then extend these concepts to the interpersonal metaphor, again shifting between forms to convey meaning in other valued ways. This project has resulted in the following case study foci over the past couple of years, ranging from culturally contextualized food choices to agricultural water scarcity to food inequality and emergency preparedness. Our final writing task is for students to write an advocacy email. We introduced students to the course and meta functions with an academic email to their instructors in Term 1. So this revisits and adapts this text type to a new context. This task also highlights how the same ideas from their case study research need different language choices to suit a new audience and purpose. Being a real-world task, the logistics of determining a recipient and preparing a polished email turns students' attention to all sorts of different features comparing their case study essays to these advocacy emails. And we're upfront with the students as to our rationale, as the need for advocacy is greater than ever. This presentation has been a quick overview of the thinking and principles behind the curricular planning. More details are included in these publications that draw further examples from these teaching materials. And finally, some of the resources that have informed this work. Thank you.